Before we go, Israel Folau was never your orthodox bash and barge football player. There was a finesse about his playing and careful deliberation about where and when he entered the line and what he did with the football when in possession. And that sense of clear thinking saw him arguably become the best player of his age in world rugby. Similar independent and considered thinking would have led him to remain standing in the recent match between the Catalan side, where he plays fullback, this is Rugby League, and St Helens in the UK. Of note, his team was hammered 34-6. But before kick-off, Israel remained standing while the 25 other players on the field and the referee knelt, all apparently in the name of Black Lives Matter. I suspect if you ask any of these people who want to take a knee what it's about, or indeed what it achieves, they wouldn't have a clue. Israel Folau, most probably more than anyone else in the game, knows what discrimination's about. He expressed thoughtful views on the Bible, which in any other age where freedom of speech would have meant something, would have passed under the guise of his rightful entitlement. Are we now in a world peopled by individuals behaving in a mindless and robotic way where freedom of thought, belief and expression actually are controversial? Indeed, in this match against St Helens, Israel's failure to take a knee has become the biggest talking point in the game. Israel Folau is a devout Christian. He would believe from his teachings that all lives matter. He would know that empty gestures like this achieve nothing for black people in America or Indigenous people in Australia or his own fellow Pacific Islanders. The violence in Aboriginal communities towards women and children will continue, victims of fellow members of the Indigenous family. 89.5% of Afro-Americans will continue to be victims of homicide at the hands of Afro-Americans. Rather than sports people following lemming-like these empty gestures, it'd be far better if everybody, the referee included, was given a sheet of paper outlining the plight of those Americans and Australians, indeed people worldwide, who suffer not from racism, but from violence, poverty, disease, inadequate education, housing, water and hygiene. And then ask, what can we do about it? And you'd come up with the answer that Israel Folau has most probably arrived at: taking a knee achieves nothing, except the likelihood of fanning further discrimination that presumably it seeks to avoid. Will Folau now be discriminated against yet again? 3 former American presidents last week paid tribute to the American black congressman and civil rights icon John Lewis. At the funeral service, reference was made to the column he wrote shortly before his death and published by the New York Times on the day of his funeral. Perhaps Israel Folau had read the message. Mr. Lewis wrote, and I quote, "Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I've done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and non-violence is the more excellent way. Now's your turn to let freedom ring," unquote. Mr. Lewis didn't write about burning down buildings and destroying Nike stores as being likely to achieve anything, let alone demonising policemen and women. Israel Folau would agree with those sentiments. He chose to stand for what he believed in. It's not for us to question that inalienable right, nor to question his motives. But he is an exemplar of the very peace and harmony and non-violence about which John Lewis wrote. I think we need more Israel Folaus rather than those who blindly follow without really knowing what they're following.